Frank, we'd love to learn more about you. Tell us about your work and how you started teaching self-led activism.
So my work originally is in spirituality. I'm a professor of spirituality at an interreligious institution in Southern California, and so I've always been interested in the intersection between of contemplative self work, kind of soul work of how do we discover and live out of the kind of the best self within us, the techniques by which we deal with the different emotions and whatnot within us towards personal restoration. And what does a influenced social engagement look like? How do we promote a world of compassion and justice and mutuality and equality, but promoting that in ways that embody some of the spiritual values of the dignity of all persons and a commitment to all persons having a voice and compassion and courage in the midst of that. So that's been my research for throughout my years of teaching. About 15 years ago, we created a Center for Engaged Compassion, where we began researching how is compassion-based activism cultivated, both what are the personal characteristics that need to be cultivated and the practices that do that, but then also how do different activist communities embody compassion in the midst of their own activist pursuits. And out of that, we created a process, so we call it a compassion practice, that's both an internal and a relational and a social set of practices that help embody what a compassionate engagement in the world might look like. And that's been the teaching and research of our center now for over 10 years.
Wonderful. So, how would you describe what self-led activism is?
Yeah, well, when I say activism, I think all of us are activists. I think of activism as just acting intentionally to promote the kind of world that we want to live in, the kind of world that embodies the values that we think are important. So that doesn't mean just those people who march and sit in on protests on Capitol Hill and whatnot. It also means any single time that one of us extends kindness to a neighbor, or tries to listen with curiosity to somebody who disagrees with us, or studies a ballot to try to discern which way I want to vote on a particular issue. We are being activists in that way. We are thinking through and being intentional about how do I want to create the world that embodies the values that are important to me. And self-led activism means engaging in that kind of activity from our self-essence, from a place of groundedness, a place of non-reactivity, a place of courage, certainly, that stands up for the principles that we feel are important and protect the vulnerable, but also extends compassion and curiosity to the other person in ways that might invite deeper understanding, invite a more right relationship. So one of my concerns and interests has been how much of our activism anywhere on that continuum really comes out of parts, right? So much of our activism comes out of our rage, or comes out of our self-righteousness, or comes out of our fear, comes out of the wounds that we still carry, comes out of dehumanizing the other and ostracizing the other. And that kind of activism, that kind of social engagement is coming from parts. And we have parts that are interested in social action, and social action parts are not the same thing as self-led activism. We want to tend to and listen to those parts to be sure. All parts have wisdom, but we want to be able to re-access that essence within us so that the kind of social engagement that we do embody and promote in the world comes out of that genuine essence of curiosity, courage, compassion, connection.
Wow, that is really fabulous. And I'm inspired just hearing about it. It helps to have the clarification around that. I'm curious how you became an IFS practitioner and have interwoven that into your spiritual studies and teachings.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting story. I mean, so like I said, my lifelong commitment has really been in compassion-based spirituality, and certainly in spiritual traditions, we often find traditions that kind of denigrate our interior worlds in different ways, whether our emotions and passions are bad, or our bodily impulses are suspicious and suspect. And just in my own personal journey, I'm an abuse survivor and have looked for resources to find my own personal restoration, and trying to find my own ways of tending my inner world, develop these practices that were radically embodying a self-compassion. This understanding that every one of, we call them interior movements, the emotions, the impulses, the self-chatter in our head, this radical understanding that every single one of them, it means well, ultimately. And when they are extreme or discordant, it's because they're rooted in suffering. And what they need is not manipulation or suppression or being let go mystically somehow. They need to be engaged with curiosity, to be listened to deeply, and actually to hear with compassion whatever the deep need is within those. And so we developed a series of practices around this kind of compassion-based personal restoration, which in my own work within activist communities, I was realizing mirrored the kind of compassion-based engagement with other folks. That the best way to engage conflict transformation, for example, is to try to listen to the deep need underneath what a person is feeling, like nonviolent communication or conflict transformation types of skills. And that when we trust that there is goodness in the other and humanity, and try to have an understanding to where they are coming from, it helps them relax and opens up the possibility for deeper connection and common ground. So I was leading retreats and workshops. We have a center engaged to promoting these types of practices. And over the years, people would say, have you ever heard of internal family systems? Because your radical insistence that everything internal is rooted in something good that is aching to be heard, and can be restored with some compassion towards itself, sounds remarkably like internal family systems. And I'd say, no, never heard of it. And then it's like, yeah, I've heard of it, but I've never been able to explore it. And so then, maybe 10 years or so ago, my wife gave me a gift and said, you know what, I'm going to take us to a retreat in Esalen, couples retreat with Richard Schwartz. So you can get a chance to meet this guy and see what this guy is all about. And so Dick and I, of course, we became fast friends. We felt like we'd been drinking the same water all these years. And so many conversations in the hot tubs, began sharing notes on what we're doing, and really came to see that we really are doing such amazingly complementary things, of the same insights. So I decided to become, go to an IFS level 1, and then become certified as a practitioner and bring it into my work. What IFS has really helped me with, that supplemented my work, well, one is introduced me to another community of folks that are just deeply committed to this self-essence and being self-led in the world, with this radical understanding of the hospitality towards all of our parts and interior movements. It's such a graced community to be a part of, as you both know. But also what Dick gave me was the systemic understanding of these parts, how they actually do live in relationship to each other, how when one part gets activated, usually they come in pairs. There's another one that's kind of polarized from that, and how that relationship lives with one another, and then how deeper parts are kind of protected, the wounded, exiled parts underneath that. And he gave kind of a topography that helped me understand the interior movements that I was going through. And then just the precision of the process that IFS has for helping somebody, the 5 Fs, kind of befriend our parts and tend to them, and to be able to facilitate with with another, that is just enormously helpful. So we've integrated a number of those practices, and certainly the sensibilities, into the workshops and retreats that we do on cultivating compassion, personal compassion, self-compassion, and compassion for the other.
Thank you. I love hearing about the connection between compassion practices and just that all parts are so welcome in the IFS model. And with that in mind, I'm curious how you really speak to diverse perspectives in your workshops and in your trainings, including that of white privilege. So if you could speak to that a little bit, I'm really curious.
Yeah, well, first of all, there's the radical understanding that everybody is unique. Everybody brings diverse perspectives, and our perspectives are shaped by our contexts, by our cultural context, religious context, social contexts. And all of those parts that are there, they are all rooted in goodness in one way or another. So the first invitation that we embody in all of our work is a radical embracing of diversity, a radical openness to what is the truth, what is the deep wisdom that is within another person's perspective, whether that be their individual perspective or their cultural or social perspective, because the same thing works true at a systemic cultural level as it does at a personal level. So a radical understanding and hospitality towards that. That being said, some cultural systems and social systems can be also embodying of extraordinarily destructive viewpoints and mindsets. And so we, especially those who are in positions of privilege and power, and certainly those of us in North America who are white, bear that white privilege. We have an added burden, an invitation to also look at the ways in which our own culturally shaped parts are active in ways that we are perhaps blind to. I mean, the way I used to say it is we often, white people, wear white colored glasses. We just see the world through our whiteness and don't even recognize things that persons of color have to live with on a daily basis. So becoming aware of and attentive to the parts of us that are culturally shaped in ways that blind us or actually embody destructive attitudes, to name those, but to tend to them, to take the U-turn and to listen to them. As destructive and myopic as they are, there are some deep places from which they come, deep needs to feel connected, deep needs to feel power. And we can find genuinely restorative ways of honoring those needs while dismantling the destructive ways in which we embody the privilege and prejudice in our own systems. So that work is integral to any kind of social engagement enterprise. Absolutely.
And IFSLA, one of our missions is to be a bridge between IFS and the general population. So it's not just work for therapists. It's not, we want this ideology, this a way of seeing the world to be accessible to everybody. So,
Yeah.
Are you familiar with what's called spiritual directors?
no.
Spiritual direction? It's kind of an ancient spiritual practice. I mean, in various spiritual traditions, Christian and Buddhist most primarily, but there's an international organization called Spiritual Directors International. You can Google them and see what their website and what they're all about. But it's kind of spirituality based companioning of another person. Sometimes it's called spiritual companioning, and it's often one-on-one, where someone would come and you get usually a 2 or 3 year certification program, a training program, and a person comes to you and it's not like giving advice guru-like. It's rather, it's really very much like IFS. Where it's helping people tap into their own native wisdom around whatever issues they are exploring and how their understanding of what is ultimate or their essence interfaces with that and informs that. And so I was a trained spiritual director, for 15 years, and am very involved in that community. And so now I'm leading IFS contributions to spiritual direction. And so, for example, I'm doing a workshop at their annual conference in April, and then I'm doing a three weekend series for spiritual companions on IFS. IFS's contribution to your ministry as a spiritual companion, and how to tend to your own parts as a spiritual director when you get activated in the midst of with folks, and and how to use some of these insights to be with another person as a companion. So that's another place where this is, and that's happening in LA, Southern California, in May and June.
Wow, Frank, this is such important food for thought. really deeply appreciate the conversation and what you're bringing to us as a community. Um, thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you for including this as part of what IFSLA is offering and for your own commitments for self led leadership. Our world is crying out for more of it.